So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this parallel session on toxic metals. Good afternoon, good evening to all, wherever you are joining us from around the world. This session will be on toxic metals, but with a focus on lead in paint. My name is Eduardo Caldera Petit. I am the Program Management Officer at the SICAM Secretariat, and I am delighted to be moderating this session today. I will briefly introduce the topic, but we have a panel of distinguished experts today that will for sure make a good overview as well of this important topic. So I won't take too much of my time, of your time, sorry, on this introduction. But I would like to first mention that children are particularly vulnerable to the health effects of environmental exposures, whether the exposures are impacts of climate change, environmental risks, or hazardous chemicals. We have heard already some facts in the opening session regarding this topic. And chemical exposure by toxic chemicals in children is a significant concern. In particular, lead exposure is. And according to the World Health Organization, the exposure to lead causes 143,000 cases of death and 600,000 cases of intellectual disability in children every year. As such, chemical safety plays an important role in protecting children's health and calls for actions to enact legislation and implement regulations necessary to protect our children from lead exposure. On the basis of exemplary national lead paint policies, we will today discuss a good number of questions, such as which drivers and barriers of lead in paint policies exist, what role do the different stakeholders play, how can we strengthen the implementation and enforcement, and how can the well-being of the child be taken into account in policy? Finally, we will also highlight the success factors that make lead paint policymaking effective. The policies that are presented today have all been nominated and fully researched by the World Future Council for the Future Policy Award 2021. I'd also like to take this opportunity to briefly speak about what the SICAM Secretariat is doing as well to address lead in paint. Lead in paint is one of the emerging policy issues of concern that are tackled and addressed through the SICAM framework. And we also are the executing agency of a JEF-funded project on global best practices on issues of concern, which include one component devoted entirely to assist countries to develop lead paint legislations and also to work with SMEs around the world to switch to the production of paint that doesn't contain lead. So within this project, we have had already some achievement that I would like to share with you today. And it's a project that started in 2019, and so far we are already at the latest stages of implementation. And throughout this project and through the work of UNEP, who is leading this component along with the Lead Paint Alliance, the project has successfully supported 17 countries that have passed lead paint legislation since the project inception. But at the same time, there are 19 other countries that have already their draft legislation completed and just waiting for the governmental approval so that they become a law in the near future. As well, within this project, we're working with over 35 SMEs in 6 countries, assisting them to switch to lead paint, to paint that doesn't contain any lead or that doesn't contain any additive of lead. And we're demonstrating through this small pilot project with these SMEs that converting to lead-free production of paint is feasible and is achievable. So these are some of the outcomes and achievement that as well on this project that is supporting to manage globally and to address this issue of lead in paint. So without further ado, I think I can start introducing our great panelists of today. So we will be hearing in this session right now from Ms. Angela Vandermeer, who is working in the US Environmental Protection Agency, and is the chair as well of the Advisory Council of the Global Alliance to Eliminate Lead Paint. She will start by sharing insights on the impact of unregulated lead in paint on children's health and why it is urgent that we act. We will then take a deeper look at the Philippines, which implemented the first successful lead-safe paint regulation in the whole Southeast Asia, and this was recognized by the Future Policy Special Award 2021. We will hear more about this inspiring policy from Mr. Joel Malion, who is the Senior Environmental Management Specialist at the Department of Environment and Natural Resources in the Philippines. We will also then interview our panelists, and then during the discussion, you are all very much invited to ask questions and make comments. Besides Ms. Angela van der Meer and Mr. Joel Malone, we're happy to welcome as panelists as well Dr. Tadesse Amera, who is co-chair of the International Pollutants Elimination Network, IPEN, and the Executive Director of Pesticide Action Nexus Association, PAN Ethiopia. Mr. Shankar Padel, as well from the Department of Environment in Nepal, and Ms. Samia Kasid, who's Senior Program Manager, the Rights of Children and Youth at the World Future Council. Thank you all distinguished speakers for accepting our invitation and making time to speak to us today. So now, without further ado, we'll be hearing from Angela on the impacts of unregulated lead on children's health. So Angela, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eduardo, and congratulations on the successes of the GEF project. It's indeed a wonderful achievement, and I hope to share with you some of that in my remarks today. As chair of the Alliance, we were involved in the project as well. So as Eduardo said, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why it's urgent to act on lead paint and some of the important things that are happening. So the urgency is that while blood lead levels in high-income countries have declined over time, although they're plateauing right now due to the phase out of leaded gasoline and also phase out of lead-based paint. Like I said, they are still plateauing in some areas and remain high in some high-income countries, but blood lead levels for children and adults in low and middle-income countries continue to be dangerously high. In the US, we saw children's blood lead levels come down significantly when we addressed lead in fuels, and therefore we helped with a global effort through UNEP to get lead out of fuels successfully. And we saw also that lead in paint was a major source of blood lead levels in children in the US. This was also seen in Europe and other countries. And we are now in the process of sharing the US experience on that with others to help reduce but also prevent high blood lead levels. So globally, lead is a concern. And as was said by previous speakers, the World Health Organization identified lead specifically UNICEF published a report saying that 1 in 3 children globally is lead poisoned, and was also confirmed in yesterday's Lancet pollution report that was put out. And as we heard as well, young children are most vulnerable to the toxic effects of leads, but also all age groups can be affected by the exposure to lead. So it can result in significant economic and social impacts at the population level. In addition, it's important to take into account that communities in these lower and middle income countries are often underserved by the healthcare community. They're vulnerable due to the pressures of poverty, undernourishment, and are thus disproportionately at risk for these health impacts. So it's incredibly important to address lead in these countries, primarily because lead impacts are not reversible. And so therefore, preventing exposure is really the best way to prevent health impacts. And so where we have solutions, like we did with leaded gasoline, it is important to act now. And therefore, on lead paint, we have the solution, and it's important to act now. Historically, lead compounds were added to paint to enhance color, reduce corrosion, shortened drying time. But there are non-leaded alternatives for all of these available now for most paints. And we also know from studies that were done in over 60 countries, 100 studies that show when looking at the market, what's available in the stores to consumers, that there are paints with high levels of lead in them that exceed the commonly established low limit, which is 90 parts per million, often exceeding 10,000 parts per million, sometimes 100,000 parts per million, sometimes even in cans that are labeled lead-free. So you can see that lead paint is an important and preventable source of exposure. And the most effective means to do that is to establish national legislation or regulations or standards that would stop the manufacture of lead paint in the first place through establishing a low limit. So most industrialized countries did this, but now we need to work with the rest of the world to help implement these laws. Also, workers can be exposed to lead, and therefore these laws could also prevent worker exposure. So to address this issue, the global community created a partnership, and it's called the Global Alliance to Eliminate Lead Paint. And it's multi-stakeholder. It involves all the key stakeholders. It is jointly led by the United Nations Environment Program and the World Health Organization. US EPA is the chair of the Advisory Council. There are over 100 partners. And we work globally with partners to help establish laws and work with SMEs, as Eduardo said. And lastly, I'd like to say that, as you heard before, more and more countries are passing laws, but over 100 countries still do not regulate lead in paint. And so therefore, eliminating lead paint globally is a very cost-effective goal. It's within reach, and it will yield both individual and societal benefits for years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angela, for that insightful introduction on the work of the lead paint, and also for mentioning the Lead Paint Alliance. It was important as well to hear from you as well about the terrible effects that lead in paint and in other combination it has on children, robbing them of even basic rights like growing up healthy, being able to participate or to study. The damage to societies is immense, and this is why it is really urgent to act. And you mentioned that there are over 100 countries that still need to regulate lead, so there's still a lot of work to do on that regard. Now that we've heard from Angela, I think we can move on to the next presenter. I'm not sure, can you confirm, Samia, if Mr. Malion is here? Okay. No worries. And then if not, we can also go and present the video that we have as well on this important case study that we wanted to share today about the Philippines. So the problem of lead in paint is widely recognized, and many countries have taken action. Lead exposure, especially in children, remains a key problem that requires urgent action, as we've heard. There are still many countries that do not impose lead paint limits or impose high limits. And at the same time, there are many good policy examples already that we've came across either through direct work or that we've also been involved at the level of the policy awards. And some of those, yes? Excellent. Some of those examples is those that we want to share with you today in the hope that they will inspire policymakers to enact similar regulations in their countries. So we'll now going to warmly welcome Mr. Joel Malion. He is the Senior Environmental Management Specialist at the Department of Environment and Natural Resources in the Philippines. So good afternoon, Mr. Malion. If you can please use the megaphone function so that you can everyone can hear you. We'd like to ask you a few questions regarding this success story. Starting in 2013, the Chemical Control Order for lead and lead compounds was adopted by the government of Philippines. It restricted the use of lead in all paints, including in industrial paints, which generally have lead concentrations that are up to 10 times higher. You have been involved from the beginning in formulating and taking this policy forward. So we want to ask from you, what are those insights into how this policy came about? So over to you, Mr. Malion.
Okay, thank you and good afternoon or good evening, everyone. I will just turn off my camera so that my connection is a little bit shaky. So, as early as 2005, lead and lead compounds has already been identified as one of the chemicals in the priority chemicals list. Now, the priority chemicals list is a list of chemicals which was identified to pose relatively higher risk to human health and the environment and needs to be closely monitored. Monitoring includes industry notifications and permitting system. And in the same year, in 2005, lead and lead compounds was one of the six chemicals which needs to be issued a chemical control order. This means that lead was identified for a gradual and eventual phase out. Then on December 2007, the first multi-stakeholders consultation for the draft chemical control order for lead and lead compound was held. Consultations lasted until 2013, so that was roughly 8 years, and endorsed to the Department of Environment and Natural Resources for evaluation and review until it was signed on December 2013. On the part of civil society's advocacy for national policy instrument, they provided lead paint analysis in 2010 and 2013, and this was used for awareness raising and outreach effort to government, industry, and public, and this increased alertness on lead in toys and other consumer products. So this was a catalyst for the development of the chemical control order for lead and lead compounds. Now, for industry, paint industries drive towards green innovation. Top paint makers and majority market share transitioning to non-lead paint production in the Philippines. This was headed by the Philippine Association of Paint Manufacturers, participation in policy dialogues and technical meetings. So this led to the phase out of lead in paints to the chemical control order and of chemical control order for lead and lead compounds, which was approved and implemented in December of 2013.
Thank you. Thank you for that explanation. And at the same time, we also want to hear from you. What do you think are the key methods in formulating this policy?
Well, as it was mentioned, as early as 2005, lead was already identified as one of the chemicals for gradual and eventual phase out. And we held series of multi-stakeholders consultation, and each of these stakeholders, civil society, relevant government agencies, industry, academe, among others, provided their respective positions. Now, all of these positions were discussed, including issues and conflicts. Civil society became the catalyst in alerting on the issues on lead in paint as the chemicals were becoming widely used in industrial applications, as well as children's product with high level of paint. Now, each sectors needed to make compromises in order to resolve the issues that were raised during the consultations. And the key here really is that all stakeholders believe in one objective, and that is human safety and safe environment for all. So all of those stakeholders have one objective, but there were so many issues, and these led to compromises on all stakeholders in order to resolve all these issues.
Thank you. That's I think a key factor to have everyone on board with the same, working towards the same objective. And I think it's good that you mentioned that. Um, at the same time, we want to hear from you. What have been the impacts of this chemical control order since its implementation, especially with regards to children health? And if you have any statistics that you'd like to share or facts, that would be also appreciated.
Well, the CCO for lead and lead compounds provided a national policy instrument to phase out lead in paints and prohibit lead in other products as well. After the implementation of the CCO, other government agencies also contributed by formulating their own policies. For example, the Department of Education implemented Department Order Number 4 in 2017 for the mandatory use of lead-safe paints in schools. So the Department of Trade and Industry also included the 90 ppm lead levels in the Philippine standards for paints and varnishes. So for the government, aside from monitoring and implementation of its policies in lead, we are also conducting regular information and education campaign to different stakeholders. So this is done regularly with the help of our regional offices. We are conducting information and education campaign, and I think with the chemical control order for lead and lead compound, which started the awareness of all, not only of other government agencies, but as well as other stakeholders, especially the end users themselves.
All right. Now, for closing this interview, if we can briefly ask you, from your point of view, what are the lessons learned and success factors of this policy that could inspire then other countries and other policymakers?
Conducting a new policy, development of new policy involves not only the government, but it should be multi-stakeholder activity, which involves different stakeholders like civil society. The users themselves should be involved in policy development. So that's why it took us about 8 years before this was implemented. It started in 2005, and it was approved in 2013. So whatever there were the objective of the stakeholders is one, which is protection of human health and the environment. Although there were so many issues that were raised during the consultations, and this led to the lengthy approval of this policy. So the key factor here is not only having one objective, but of being able to compromise. All these stakeholders should be able to compromise in order to achieve those objectives that we are right now experiencing in terms of the effects of the banning of lead in paints here in the Philippines. So I think that is one key factor. Number one, a multi-stakeholder approach in the development of policy. And number two, being able to compromise. Each of the stakeholders should be able to compromise in order to achieve this common objective.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Malion, for sharing that successful example of the Philippines addressing lead in paint, and for sharing with us as well those that you consider key factors that should be critical for any other policymakers or countries that are engaging into lead legislation formulation. So I think now it's time to move on to our panel, and we will have a discussion about the most critical elements of effective chemical policy making on the basis of exemplary national lead paint policies. During this discussion, you are all very much invited to ask questions and make comments using the chat. and I will direct your questions or comments directly to the speakers during the debate. So we are going to have now Mr. Dr. Tadesse Amera, who, as I mentioned, is co-chair of IPEN and also the executive director of PAN Ethiopia. We will have Mr. Shankar Paul from the Department of Environment in Nepal, Ms. Samia Kasit from the World Future Council, in addition as well to Mr. Malion, who will continue to join us in this discussion and hopefully to as well address some of the questions that you might have. And last but not least, we will also have Ms. Angela Vandermeer from the USCPA and chair as well of the Global Alliance to Eliminate Lead Paint. So the first round of questions to our participants is to know more about the lead work and policies in Ethiopia, Nepal, and the Lead Paint Alliance, the key elements and their impact on children's health. These policies have been nominated and fully researched by the World Future Council for the Future Policy Award 2021. So let me start now with Angela Vandermeer. So Angela, you are the primary staff contact for the Global Alliance to Eliminate Lead Paint, which is also called Lead Paint Alliance. And you were also part of the working group that have developed the model law and guidance for regulating lead paint. That model law and guidance was shortlisted for the Future Policy Award 2021. Can you tell us more about the work of the Global Alliance and this specific UN model law?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good, thank you. Yes, I'd be happy to share that. Thank you, Eduardo. So as I said before, the Global Alliance to Eliminate Lead Paint is a multi-stakeholder group, and in a sense, it's symbolic of the multi-stakeholder dialogue that happens at the national level, because it includes the paint industry, it includes civil society, NGO, academia, governments, but also intergovernmental organizations. And so the role of the Alliance is really to provide a globally consistent message, as Mr. Malion said, very important to have the common objective of human health and working towards that, because the decisions that have to be made and the actions that have to be taken, while not impossible, do require change. And so to drive that change, the Alliance essentially keeps the drumbeat going at the global level. So we have agreed with industry and with all the partners to work jointly on a primary goal to promote the establishment of lead paint laws as the solution to eliminating lead paint. So all the partners are on board with this. So every action that the Alliance takes, all the tools that the Alliance develops work towards this goal. And specifically, the laws help stop the manufacture, import, and sale of lead paint. So as we said before, this has led to 84 countries having laws now. This is, I think Eduardo said 16 or 17 more than when was in 2019. And SMEs are now also reformulating because of UNEP's work directly with the SMEs on the ground to help them reformulate. So how does the Alliance do this? The Alliance started out by providing initially guidance on how one would actually write such a lead paint law. What would it say? What are the provisions? Why are the provisions what they are? And we developed this with UNEP in a working group made up of all the key stakeholders. And it's a model law for regulating lead paint. And it provides guidance to countries that can use it and adopt it in any way they see fit at the country level. So it was developed based on best practices, and at the time there were a few best practices. One of them was the Philippine law, and it had already been in place, as we just heard, since 2013. and the model law was developed in 2018. And then we essentially looked around for what would be sort of the golden standard, the gold standard of what a law should look like. This law is now used as the basis for helping countries draft their own laws. But of course, every country has its own framework. So this law is adapted at the country level to whether it's a standard, whether it's a regulation, whether it's a decree. Each country has its own approach. In addition to helping with drafting laws, though, the Alliance is starting to shift slowly to also help with implementation, such as how to reformulate paint. And UNEP has developed technical guidelines to do that. And now the Alliance is also in the process of developing compliance and enforcement guidance. So building on the model law, building on what needs to be in an effective law, one has to think about compliance and enforcement while one drafts a law so that the law itself contains the right provisions for documenting compliance, for assuring that those who are affected by the law know exactly what they need to do. In addition, as Mr. Malian said and others have said, the Alliance develops materials that can be used to raise awareness. And the Alliance conducts an annual event to do that. And many civil society members, but also governments and others, conduct events on an annual basis using the materials that are published on the World Health Organization's site. But also increasingly, these types of awareness raising events happen throughout the year as part of multi-stakeholder activities to talk about laws or to raise awareness of the public. The Alliance also runs events that continue the dialogue in between all of these things. And UNEP has developed a lead and paint community of practice. So those of us who work in the space from all angles can come together on a periodic basis to discuss questions and talk with each other. So not just through the Alliance, but starting to network among and between countries to exchange experiences. And then finally, though the GEF project is coming to an end, that was a major source of funding for the work. The Alliance will wrap up some of that with workshops that are going to be happening in regions, but we're also doing things beyond the end of the project, such as in the fall, the United States Environmental Protection Agency is working with the American Standards Materials Society to develop a testing our working. So you can see that the Alliance is going to continue its work to, at the global level, continue this drumbeat so that the governments at the national level can use it in their processes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Angela, and thank you for providing this overview as well of the Lead Paint Alliance and mentioning as well this community of practice that we've established and here at the SciCam Secretariat, which I think it's a good venue as well to continue discussions and engage all relevant stakeholders, including governments, in insightful online exchanges and to share best practices amongst countries. So there are a lot of tools available to continue these discussions. So, Mr. Poder, we are coming back to you, and we would like to ask you which policy recommendations do you see as particularly critical for your efforts?
We are implementing this standard, and regarding to the children, the lead in to is also important one, and we have to introduce this standard in future as well, including the lead in paint standard. And people are still not much aware about the lead poisoning, and every house are using the paint, every house painting their according to their choice, but they are not aware about the lead. Therefore, one of the major activity to go for that is the awareness program. Campaigning of awareness program is first priority, and after that, continuous monitoring and regular strict rules and regulation on the prescribed standard, and go for the beyond that point and go for the uh, lead paint standard for children toys also. It is one of the issue. Previously, government of Nepal introduced this toys lead in toys standard, but due some issues, government withheld this prescribed standard, and still it is still in discussion for future implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Podel. I'd like now to turn on the mic to Dr. Tadesse again, and to share with us as well, more specifically on Ethiopia, who has also been working on banning other sources of lead poisoning. Which of the policy recommendations would you see as key for this?
Thank you very much again. We followed the same process as the leading paint, and now the Ethiopian government already accepted a roadmap to the environmentally sound management of lead acid batteries, and we are now also drafting a directive, which is a legally binding directive. It is in the process of adoption for environmentally sound management of lead acid batteries in Ethiopia. And from the 7 recommendations I select, all are important. All the recommendations that are coming presented by Samia were very useful. The first one in this process we followed is to act as if millions of children's lives are at stake, because they are, and that is the first one. And the second one is considering this to have a regulations that's legally binding. And the third one, this is also the motto and the slogan of IPEN. We have to create a pathway to a toxic-free future for and for the environment biodiversity. So these are the three recommendations that I refer from the Council's recommendations that are coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Tadesse. Mr. Malion, I am also curious to hear your perspective. So, which policy recommendations are crucial for your current efforts in the Philippines?
Well, I think since we already have the policy instrument in place, it just needs continuous improvement. I think policy recommendation number 4 on information and education campaign. Since the Philippines is an archipelagic country composed of 7,100 islands, it is very difficult to reach out to remote areas in the Philippines where internet is not really strong. So with the advent of multimedia and all this information materials, I think this is very important because with that certain information, individuals can also be aware of what to do and how to act on these toxic chemicals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Malion. Now, I would like to turn over to you, Mr. Malion, to know, in your view, is the situation improving globally? And is the speed of that improvement fast enough? How can we catalyze the global phase out of lead in paint?
Yes, I think the key factor here is that all stakeholders should have a common objective to eliminate lead in paint, or not only lead in paint, but lead in different consumer products. So Other things are information and education campaign. Uh, you may have a good policy, may have a good law, but if this does not reach for the end users, does not understand these policies, then I think it would not work well as intended. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Malion. So the same question as well for you, Dr. Tadese.
Thank you again, Eduardo. We are talking about the global south and the problem in the global south. So I will iterate what the others said, and Angela also stressed about the multi-stakeholder approach that was given from high up. I'm very grateful to USCPA, WHO, and UNEP to take that initiative and to trickle down to the national level so that governments, civil society, and industry can also work together. That's one thing, one success factor. And this success factor to be implemented on the ground, if it's not well financed, we are dealing on issues in the global south where there is a scarcity of resources. So this was also supported by GEF. And the initiative supported by financing from GEF, we succeeded this. So when we are initiating something, it should also be supported by financing. That's one thing. And for the others to learn also for HHP, lead acid batteries, and other things, this model is a great model for other chemical issues to solve the problems, because this should not be given to the UN institutions, to governments or others, or civil societies. There should be a stakeholder approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tades. And then Mr. Podel, could you please as well answer the same question on the success factors?
Thank you again. One of the key issue is the awareness raising point, and besides that, strict implementation of law and integrated plan to manage the chemical, not a single chemical like lead, but lead or lead acid battery, usually lead acid batteries, and so on. Integrated plan would be effective for the management of such hazardous chemical. And besides that, these issues previously raised in other international forum like SciCam raised these issues, UNEP also raised, and continuously going on these issues in international forum and making a common consensus among stakeholders and parties to those forum, then it would be very much effective to implement. Because country like Nepal, still we have capacity level is very low, and we need a capacity building program to identify the source chemical in entry point, as well as from the manufacturer side identification and so on. Capacity building of those countries where it is necessary, and how to check in the entry point and so on. That would be much more effective if we go for coming all stakeholders in a single platform, and implementing these parts would be very good for the management of such chemical. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Podel. I see that Angela might want to share a last thought, so please go ahead, Angela.
Yes, sorry, it has been great, and I know we're almost out of time, but I did want to add that while resources are important, of course, and we've all said that, the lead paint model law was designed to be as easy to implement as possible, to make it very easy to check on compliance. And we have found countries that at first said they needed a lot of resources to do it, were able to figure out how to integrate it into their existing processes. So it actually was able to move forward on a kind of lower than usual level of effort for resources. So I just do want to say that as well, that I think as far as cost effectiveness, this approach could be a good model for others as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. I think that was an important thought as well to share. Before we wrap up this discussion, which personally has been very, very enriching and insightful. So I'd like to thank you once again very much, dear panelists, for sharing your concluding thoughts with us and for all these presentations we had and discussion points throughout the session. Here we have highlighted a number of critical success factors that helped to enact legislation and implement policies necessary to protect our children from lead in paint, but also other lead sources that I will be happy to summarize in the final plenary right now at 4 p.m. Central European time. We hope that you also found this parallel session useful and that it will inspire and urge further action that prevents childhood lead poisoning and eliminates lead paint, considering the best interest of the child in policy making. Please, everyone, join us now in the plenary room for the concluding debate, during which we will share insights on the latest promising international developments, but also present the poll results and a short summary of the key success factors discussed in the other parallel session as well on pesticides.